All right. So as we were preparing for what we do, you and I, on Wednesdays, people don't know we have a conversation on Wednesday because we are filling in the things we don't know, the people we don't know. Like last week we did Hubert Harrison. Thank you for that.
Yes. Oh, wonderful.
And, we're working on some other things.
Yes.
We got a text that somebody has made a transition today.
Yes. While we were talking, doing what we do on Wednesdays, for those of you know. So, first of all, Karen Hunter, it works all the time. So, I'm happy to work, but I mean, she works all the time. But as we were in this conversation, got a text from our brother Roland Martin. He said that Paul Mooney, the great comedian out of Shreveport, Louisiana, has made transition just short. I guess he would have been 80. This August, so he made transition, and of course, he hadn't been well for a while. But tell us, Professor Hunter, when you hear the name Paul Mooney, what do you think?
I think Kwame Brown. No, I think
the torch has been passed. Is that what you
said? Don't give up. Yeah, no. I think Richard Pryor.
How about that?
I think without Paul Mooney, we wouldn't know the fullness of Richard Pryor in terms of his comedic genius. I know that he wrote. I think Dave Chappelle. I think Paul Mooney definitely laid the foundation. And, this kind of unapologetic Blackness, but finger poked in the eye of whiteness. The stuff he says about the Queen of England. I mean, just, how he holds that. Oh, my gosh. Yeah. Paul Mooney's like that. Paul Mooney's like the Nation of Islam of comedy. Do you know? It's like,
that's genius. Yes.
All Black people, we may not publicly, like embrace it or acknowledge it, but we all know what it is, and we all, even if we do it secretly, absolutely are in line with it. So,
oh my goodness, yes, that's so funny. We were talking before you record, and I think what you just said frames him beautifully. The things that, as Malcolm X would say, Malcolm said, "I'm the man you think you are." So, in other words, I'm saying what we all say, but I'm gonna say it to anybody who's listening, and even if you're not listening. So, and yeah, when I think of Paul Mooney, what you said frames it beautifully. It really does. The things that come most quickly to mind for me are whenever he was being interviewed, and an interviewer would ask him a question, and he would cut directly to the chase. And I would enjoy trying to see how the interviewer would then jump back in, because it's clear that Paul Mooney has just taken it to the core now. Now, do you really want to have an interview? You want to talk about this, or is this just one of those junket things where that's? And the other thing is, as we know, you say Paul Mooney wasn't the Paul Mooney we had come to know and appreciate and love near the end of his life, but like so many Black folk, continued to work, and he was still Paul Mooney. So the last time I saw Paul Mooney in person, in fact, was the last time I saw Dick Gregory perform. Now, I saw Mr. Gregory many times after that and working with him, and he would come on campus sometime. We sit and talk, and he was working on some things. I was trying to help him with his son, Christian, and Johanse and Iana, the two youngest. So I would see him a lot. But the last time I saw them perform, they performed together. They were on tour together, very near the end. And so Paul Mooney was opening for Dick Gregory. And, as everyone can imagine, because I imagine some people who were watching this probably saw that tour. They were in New York. I saw him in DC, actually at the Howard Theater. And, you wonder how a building can survive that amount of fire. So, and these are cats, at the end, Mr. Gregory in particular, he'd sit in a chair in the middle of the stage, surrounded by those bags he would carry with newspapers and journals and stuff. And he just picked some up, started. Paul Mooney, no newspapers. He just sitting there throwing fire on people. And you just wondering, there's nowhere else. Wait, what did he just say? Oh, come on, man. And then whatever he said for shock value, he was, no. That, you know what it is. You know what it is. He wouldn't let us escape the responsibility of finding the kernel of truth in what he was saying. And I think that Paul Mooney is kind of like that person who would say something, and then you want to get up and leave, and he grab your wrist. So I can't. Oh, no. Come sit No, you can't escape the truth of this. Another thing is quickly that in 2009, as you said, Paul Mooney, who worked with Richard Pryor from the early days, and for anybody who is surfing on YouTube or in social media, and you go and look at those like Dean Martin roasts, you realize that the things they were saying then will get them erased but that even as it was joking and satire, it wasn't hurtful, it wasn't harmful. So all this conversation we're having now about cancel culture, we wouldn't know any of those comedians. We wouldn't know Marshall Warfield. We wouldn't know Tim Reed. We wouldn't know Richard Pryor and Paul Mooney for sure. Just in turn, Robin Williams is at those tables, and he's like the youngest, and he can't even say nothing. So when we ask who are Black people to each other, that governance question, who Paul Mooney was to us, and then who he is to the social structure, Paul Mooney is barely known. He's known, but when you look at who he was to us, as you said, he's the foundation for so much of that conversation. And so my nephew was visiting, and Ellington was, I think he was 10 or 11. He was here in DC, and we went to the bookstore. We always went to the bookstore. And for some reason, this boy said, I want that book. It was Paul Mooney's book, Black is the New White. I said, what are you going to do with that book? He said, I want to read it. And I thought about it. So I bought it. Now, that book, my nephew is now 19. That book is still here. Whenever he comes, because I could not let my sister's son take that book back to Houston. But Paul Mooney is writing about coming up as a comedian with Richard Pryor, as somebody who's writing for Pryor, who's arguing with Pryor, who's learning from Pryor, who Pryor is learning from, and that journey to truth tell in the immediate wake of the civil rights Black power movement. And so when we, like you say, when we hear Dave Chappelle, when we hear Dave Chappelle and say, wow, Dave Chappelle's a truth teller, everybody pause. If you think Dave Chappelle's a truth teller, and shout out always, not only to Dave Chappelle, but to the person who's probably the spine of Dave Chappelle's humor in terms of his analysis, which is his mother, Dr. Yvonne Sion. Go back and look at our conversation we had about Dave Chappelle last summer, because Dr. Sion, a lot of what you hear coming out of Dave Chappelle's mouth, that foundation was laid by Dr. Yvonne Sion, and he talks about that. But if you like Dave Chappelle, you owe it to yourself to read Black is the New White, because the Paul Mooney did a lot of that work.
Dave Chappelle wrote the foreword.
How about that? That tells you right. Oh, Karen, that reminds me. When Eddie Murphy got the Mark Twain Prize from the Kennedy Center, I'll never forget. This is the time that Mr. Gregory was working on his last book. That's what I was helping him with, Black History book. I got a call from Christian, his son, because we were supposed to meet that Monday. I think it was a Monday, because they taped the thing at the Kennedy Center, as they always do. And he said, Christian called me and said, look, Dad is going to be a little late meeting you today. Because I would always open with this and say, Chris, look, man, I'll meet your pop wherever, because he live in DC. I'm not, look, man, he said, no, he wants to meet you. Dick Gregory drove to damn near they had to take the keys from him when they took him to the hospital. He would pull up in that little 2-seat Benz. I don't care where he never want you to meet him. He would drive up on Howard's campus and park anywhere. And the guards, hey man, it's Dick Gregory. He get out the car with all these bags. I'm helping him get bags. Anyway, Chris calls me and says, Christian says, yeah, Dad's gonna be a little late. I said, no, man, we can reschedule. He said, no, he's coming. He just was up all night. I said, what you mean? He said, you know, they had the thing at the Kennedy Center. I said, yeah, he was telling me about it last week. They got him a room. He's downtown near the Kennedy Center. All the comedians that were there went. So this is Eddie Murphy. This is, you name them, Chris Rock, all of them. They all go to Mr. Gregory's room, and he held court all night with those cats. Stayed up all night. So you can imagine Paul Mooney. I mean, so I'm saying that to say that when you see Dave Chappelle write the foreword to that book, it isn't just out of tribute to Dave Chappelle. You know this better than I do, Karen, because you interact with everybody, including many of these people who we see and don't ever get a chance to talk with. People don't see, in terms of the governance structure of Black people, there is an intergenerational bond that folks don't let people outside of our community see. That's not just, oh yeah, I'm gonna name my name with Paul Mooney's name. No, these cats literally sit at the knee. Some of them sit at the knee of these elders. Paul Mooney was an elder who was respected. I don't know that we'll ever be able to really plumb the depths of his impact on generations, simply because the story I'm telling you is not written anywhere. I only know it because I was helping Mr. Gregory, and his son told me he's gonna be a little late because he was up all night with those cats. That's who Paul Mooney was to us. It's very powerful.
So how should we remember him as we, and I want to thank you, because I never thought about people who died as ancestors immediately. You brought that into lexicon. You brought that into my, and to think about them as ancestors now puts them in a place of honor that I didn't have a perspective on until we started having these conversations. And then also the conversations we had about people and how Africans see ancestors. So that added another layer in terms of, which is what this work that we do, that people don't see, that we do on throughout the week and on Saturdays. To me, it built a fire to have to reclaim, as you say, remember, but also, tie us to the past and bring it to the future and have everything converge. So Paul Mooney, he may have made transition, which is another thing that I now say because of you, transition, but he's still here and he's present in a lot of people, and those who aspire to be comedians. Because until you said Dick Gregory, I was like, oh yeah, he was a comedian.
Right.
I don't think about Dick Gregory as a comedian first.
No.
But the different ways in which these people have impact, and that impact continues because they're never actually really gone. How do we look at the future of Paul Mooney and his spirit and his energy, and how should that inspire those people who want to tell truth through comedy, through jokes? Because that's all that they were really doing, telling us the truth through the lens of something that can make us chuckle.
That's a very good question, Professor Hunter. For those of you who are with narrative, and we encourage you, this is another reason that why narrative is so important, because we had this conversation almost a year ago now, when we were talking about this question of the Jali, the Doma in West African cultures, thinking about Hampate Ba, the great Burkina Faso historian, Burkinabe historian, who writes about this in the UNESCO, United Nations General History of Africa. He calls it the living tradition. There are memory keepers who have a responsibility of absolute truth, the Doma. They are expected, in fact, the saying goes, the Doma does not know how to lie. So when you hear them open their mouth, people rely on that is what happened. Paul Mooney has a Doma sensibility, but then when you think about in the broader field of Jollies, in fact, I think we were talking about it in terms of Dave Chappelle, in terms of what his analysis of George Floyd in that context. A Jolly has, which the French call griots, and we talk about, oh, griot is a storyteller. You're a griot. That word don't mean nothing. So we can take that French word and stick it over there in the social structure category, and that's very nice. But in our categories, and again, thinking about language we can pull from, Jolly means blood. And so the role of a memory keeper in that particular African society, and it spills over into the Mende, the Manding, is the idea is that the storyteller, the person who has the memory rather, is like blood in a body. It keeps your body alive. Blood circulates everything. And so there's a category called Doma. They have to be absolutely true. But in that broad field of Jolly, you can have Jolly who are like hype women and men. They're always telling you something to get you inspired. You got folk who are gonna put the fire on you. And it seems to me that Paul Mooney kind of fits, not quite Doma, but he is a truth teller, but he does it in a way where the delivery system, he kind of plays between fact and fiction. He's telling those stories. Now, how does that relate to how we should think about him, or one of the ways we can think about him? I won't say necessarily should think about him. Ancestors were human beings who walked on top of the earth, which means they are not perfect. We know, of course, about the brother Rashawn Khan, who was Richard Pryor, who worked with Pryor, who had allegations that, Paul Mooney had molested Richard Pryor Jr. and all this kind of thing. We think about in hip hop, whether it be Africa Bambaataa. When we get, and this isn't to say that those things aren't important to discuss, but in Western society does this. When it's their heroes, they treat them like jollies. They treat them like memory keepers, or they mythologize them. So if you want to talk about, in fact, did John F. Kennedy sleep with other women, this kind of thing? And they say, yeah, we'll make a movie about it and romanticize it. Right? But when it comes to our people, these become character destroying, which is why I loved at Marion Barry's ritual of transition, his funeral. We were here in DC, and Louis Farrakhan got up and he said, they came to me and they said, how can you celebrate a man who was a drug abuser, who slept with other women? And Farrakhan was like, yes, you're talking about John F. Kennedy. And then the whole crowd just rose to the meeting. In other words, he told that reporter, if you're going to come from Marion Barry, then you better come for John Kennedy. So in terms of how we should think about Paul Mooney, as he is an ancestor, understand that once you've made transition, it's not that you forget who that person was when they walked on top of the ground, but like the jolly, you pull out of their journey on the earth those things which will continue to help us circulate as a community. And so when you watch Paul Mooney, you think, what is he saying now that I'm afraid to say right now, even though he's an ancestor? And you can draw strength from what he has said. The same way we draw strength from Richard Pryor, the same way we draw strength from Nina Simone, the same way we draw strength from Harriet Tubman or Frederick Douglass, we draw from the best that they did. And that's the beauty of ancestors. Ancestors, whether you believe that they can intervene in the lives of human beings who walk the earth or not, we know for sure one thing they can do, and that's why we rely on them for memory. They give us high points that we can always hold on to because they did those things while they were walking on top of the earth. And I think Paul Mooney should be saying, if you're going to be a comedian in particular, if that's your craft, you should study Paul Mooney. You should add his name to the people you study and then ask yourself, what am I doing with my comedy? Or I should say one other thing about that. I'm not a historian. I'm in Africana studies, as we've talked about. It's a much different kind of approach to things. Draws on all those things, but it really is a different kind of approach. But I'm fascinated by memory keepers. And so I ask historians all the time, in those categories that you would list under the genre of history, the discipline of history, in the subfields, who are the most accurate historians? And invariably, the same answer comes back. Military historians. Why are military historians the most accurate? Because all they're interested in is who won, who lost, and why. So they're not trying to make up. In other words, if we're going to fight again, we need to know why we lost the last time. So they're not interested in, well, I was fighting for, no. I just want to know, how did you get behind me? What was this flank move? What was Pickett's charge in the Civil War? Okay, the Battle of the Bulge. I mean, they're going, now, among those who are performers, who, if we think about it, you might make a case that comedians in many ways are the most accomplished performers. Why? Because what comedy is reaching into the minds of your audience and finding that place in them that exists in all of us, the line between the thing we know in our heart and the world as it is, and what they really are, practitioners of irony. Irony is when you can say one thing and have two different opinions about it. And so what the great Black comedians do are saying, I'm Black, you're Black, and we laugh the hardest when we say, that's true. That shit is true. And I never get to say it. Thank you. So think about the comedians you love the most. The Black comedians you love, white people and Black people are laughing for two different reasons.
Say that.
For two different reasons. Paul Mooney was a master of irony. He would say the thing, Black person, white people, both people crying their eyes out laughing. Now there are a couple who could cross the line. Think about, I should mention him too. Paul Mooney. Yeah, Robin Williams. They love Robin Williams. Yeah, that's cute. George Carlin. Was in that crew with Paul Mooney. George Carlin, I'm gonna say this because one of the people we're talking about in narrative side is John Brown. It's not a perfect analogy, but it's close enough. And if you go to narrative, at some point you'll see this conversation. Maybe in terms of comedy, George Carlin is the John Brown of comedy. We think about that. So let's just stop right there on that. But it's because he's hanging out with Paul Mooney and those guys.
Rest in power, Dr. Carr. Thank you. I'll see you on Saturday in Narrative.
Yes. So good to see you, Professor Hunter. Another semester comes to an end, and now we get into that bigger classroom.
Yes, I can't wait. See you Saturday.
See you Saturday.